Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Stefanos Tsitsipas has won in Dubai with a new racket, and we're going to have in this video Jonas from TennisNerd explaining what Stefanos Tsitsipas's previous setup was, how he advised him on potentially how he could change his setup in terms of different strings, rackets, setups just generally, and also the ideal setup that he thought would be best for him. At the time, Jonas said that Stef didn't really take on his advice, but it seems that now he has taken it on to some degree anyway, and we'll discuss that more in depth in a second. Before we do get into it though, remember to that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. If you're also a fan of TennisNerd, go and check out his content, give him a subscribe as well, of course. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to very briefly talk about Stef and his resurgence, and then we're going to talk about his setup in terms of his what looks to be his current setup, and then you guys can enjoy Jonas talking about Stef in detail in terms of his previous setup with the blade, and also a setup that he thinks he would benefit from, which I think is pretty much in line with what he's now using, which is interesting, of course. So, Tsitsipas wins his first Dubai championship, and it's arguably, and I think it is, his biggest hardcore win, at least outdoor hardcore win anyway. He had made the final twice before in Dubai, losing to Djokovic in 2019, and then Roger Federer as well a year later in 2020. So this was a big win over Felix Auger Aliassime, who has been playing some really good tennis this year. Some really good tennis. He's in terms form-wise, he's a top 5 player in terms of form, that is. So Tsitsipas was relieved. He's now broken back into the top 10, which is great. We've got another one-hander in the top 10, or a one-hander in the top 10. Dimitrov has dropped out of the top 10, so he's kind of gone back in. And in terms of the head-to-head, well, he now has a 7-3 head-to-head versus Felix, which is great. And I thought he looked really good. 85% of first serve points won. The first serve is looking potent at times, the forehand especially, and the backhand, which, I mean, he recorded a 9.8 out of 10 rating from Tennis Insights, and which are the stats for the ATP Tour, which was just phenomenal. And it takes into account speed, spin, potency, depth, etc. Just all the different factors you think of in terms of shot quality. But yeah, 9.8 is just mind-boggling, if I'm being completely honest. It's phenomenal in terms of... yeah, I was just super impressed with that to see from Tsitsipas, because the one-hander has been such a big issue for him. 1-11 now in ATP 500 finals. He'd lost 11 in a row in ATP finals at the 500 level, but finally gets on the board. So good to see. I mean, it's a crazy stat that is, that he had lost 11 in a row, given that he's of course won Masters 1000 tournaments, etc., etc. So let's talk about his current setup then, in terms of his racket, and what kind of differences there might be from now to before. And I think Jonas, as I said, that we'll get to that in a second. We'll talk in more detail. But very briefly, Tsitsipas was using a pro stock old version of a blade, and 18 by 20 string pattern with 4G strings, and he essentially 4G strings. I think it was £53 to £51. Now, the blacked out racket that Tsitsipas has been using has a thicker, more rounded, like beam shape than the blade that he was using. It's also got a 16 by 20 string pattern, which is more open, so it gives you better access to power and spin. And then it looks like a stiffer layup generally as well, so he can generate a bit more pace and jump on his serve. And it also seems to have given him a bit more margin for error on the one-hander. Now, obviously the blade is a control racket, so you'd expect it to give him a lot of control, right? Precision. But what this racket's giving him, and it's been speculated, and there's been pictures of people zooming into his racket getting strung up and it being blacked out, of course, with Wilson's stencil on it. But it seems that what's being blacked out there is the writing of Babolat on the side. Now, a lot of people are saying it's the Babolat Pure VS. A lot of others are saying it's the Babolat Pure Aero 98. I mean, it's much the muchness, really. I think it could be either. It doesn't look like it's the Shift, which is the only 16 by 20 racket it could potentially be from Wilson's. So, yeah, it doesn't look like a Shift, if I'm being honest. I've tested the Shift before as well and played with it, so it does look like an Aero. And I guess that text would indicate that it is. So, yeah, look, I mean, in terms of what it's given him, well, if he's playing with a racket that gives him more pop, there's a few reasons for that, and a few reasons why he's transitioned. So, number one, I think the balls have gotten slower, and also the courts have gone slower, and he needs an extra edge. He's been struggling for form, and I think really being able to get through his opponents and the courts. His serve and forehand are his biggest weapons, and I think he probably has felt that he hasn't been able to get the most out of those. With a racket that's going to give him more pop, more power and spin, that's going to be the ideal, really, I think. And the question is, how can he balance it with making sure that he doesn't then hit a lot of unforced errors and he's able to stay solid? And it seems like the setup that he's gone with has meant that actually even on the backhand side, it seems that he's more confidently swinging through that one-hander. And, I mean, it's looked really good. Really, really good at times. So, look, I mean, it's a very positive week for him. It's only 1 week, so you have to bear that in mind, and we'll see how he gets on later down the line. But here's Jonas with me discussing his previous setup and what Jonas thinks would be his ideal setup as well going forward, which, as I said, is probably something similar to what he's got now. This conversation happened before Stef got the new setup. Enjoy.
Because some people like a board. So if you want to create like a board-like feel in your tennis rackets, you have a dense pattern racket like a Blade 98 1820, and then you put a stiff string, Luxulum 4G. And then you get like to Stefanos racket setup, and I have dealt with Stefanos a little bit the last year with rackets and stuff. And he likes the board. Like, he doesn't like when you add like a gut, or we try different hybrids and stuff like this. He doesn't really like it. And that's, up to him. So he has a preference, right?
You talked about Stef, right? You worked with him on testing out some setups, etc.
Yeah, I helped him like a little bit unofficially, right? But but still, it's interesting to get I've done it with other pros as well the last few years, and you get an interesting, like an insight into like his life, and also the different pros, like they are more open to testing nowadays, and that's been a learning experience for me. Like, if you go back maybe 10 years, they were a little bit more like, okay, I'm stuck with this. But now the younger generation, they're more like, okay, I need more power now. The balls are bad. There's a big discussion about the quality control of the balls being using less good rubber since COVID due to manufacturing issues and stuff like that. And pretty much all the players I talk to, like, they complain about the balls in some way. So they want a bit more from the racket, less strain on the elbow, because also the pros, they get obviously overuse injuries on their elbow. They don't have like bad technique, but they get overuse. They put a lot of strain on their arm. So that's interesting to see that the pros are also open, like testing different strings, testing different tensions.
On Stef, though, do you have, obviously he was unofficial, but do you have like an insight into like what his current setup is now at the moment?
Yeah. He's using a Blade 98 1820 pro stock, like from a bunch of years back. And he uses Luxulum 4G. And they uses that at 23 kilos and 22 kilos in the crosses. So he went down a bit after his elbow. That was something we discussed, of course. And that's in pounds, that's 51 and 49, which is kind of what I use as well. Like, I my tension go to his 51 mains and 49 crosses. I like that. Not going all the way up to like the Alcaraz territory, which is 55, 51, but he hits the ball like a crazy person. So, but yeah, that's Stef's setup. I think he doesn't really want to tweak so much. I mean, he tried everything for a while, but I think now he's hitting the ball well, but yeah, he is struggling to, like Medvedev, to get W's on the board. I mean, he got a few in Rotterdam. I was there actually, and but yeah, it's tricky for these guys now, kind of stuck in the middle generation to I guess get over the fact that these guys are so good, like Alcaraz and Sinner, and then you have Fonseca coming as well. So it's a tough one out there now.
Yeah, they've got the scar tissue as well, right, from the big three, and then also
Yeah.
now the next gen coming through. So they thought it was going to be their time now, and it doesn't quite seem that way, unfortunately. If you were to you advising Steph, right? So if you put your tennis nerd hat on, which I'm sure you've always got, what would you say would be the ideal setup from your perspective for him to give him what he needs in terms of his game? You know, his big serving forehand, that's comes to the net a lot, transitions. What would you say is maybe off the top of your head, like an ideal setup that might work for him the best?
Yeah, I mean, I think for him it would be better to have a little bit of a stiffer, slightly more forgiving frame, right? Like, so we talked about the RF Pro, the new RF, having a little bit more of elliptical beam helps a bit of a stiffness on the one-handed backhand, because that I think he can shank a little bit sometimes. I mean, he needs a little bit more forgiveness, I think would be good for him. So a stiffer frame with a bit more of a modern beam design. So the RF Pro I thought would be interesting for him to try. I don't know if he's tried it yet, to be honest, but he needs to stay within Wilson, so you can't really suggest whatever, if you're sponsored. But outside Wilson, I would think like an ISO 98 or something, just getting that a little bit more, staying within 98, because it's such a tough thing for a pro to go up in head size. That's tricky. I mean, Roger had to do it from 90 to 97 because he was playing such a like an old school racket. But if you're in the 98 range, I don't see that you're going to go up to 100. I don't see that for him quite. But he could also try, another thing I've suggested is to try the Alex de Minaur setup, which is the Steam 99 he's using with a 16-19 string pattern. So he has an extra string. Usually the Steam 99 is 16-18, but they have the Pro Stock version with the 16-19 for de Minaur. And that seems to work really well for him. And it's also a firmer racket with a little bit more forgiveness. So that's what I feel like could work for him. But then, it's like you can have many ideas, and then we see what works on court, and it's all in the head and it's all in the hand, right? So it's really up to the player. And sometimes it could be the right solution over a long time or period of time, but you need like half a year to sacrifice results. And that is very, very tricky for players to do. Like if they play like 2 tournaments and things go not so well, they just want to go back to their old setup, even though it might be right to persist. And I mean, when Roger switched, it took him quite a while and some lukewarm results for him to stay, but it was the right choice. And in the end, he won 3 more slams. So I think it's a tricky one to navigate for the pros, but sometimes they need to persist with it.
Yeah, short-term pain for long-term gain, right? That's what it is.
Yeah.
And they say that when you do coaching as well, right? With a tennis coach, they'll say they break down your technique and they'll say, well, okay, you might need to go through a bit of pain for a couple of months, but longer term it's going to help you. But at the pro level, they're so good. They probably think, if I just go back, it'll be fine. But yeah, it's interesting. On the strings for him, you said he has polyester, right? In the crosses and the mains.
Yeah,
so
4G. Yeah.
So he I'm assuming he's tried natural gut, but it's interesting because I would have thought for someone like him, who it seems like feel is could be quite a big part of his game. But are you surprised by that? Like, what would you recommend for a string setup?
Yeah, I mean, we did try all the we all tried gut, mains, crosses. We tried all the power, or he tried it, but yeah, and he didn't. If the sensation, he doesn't like the sensation of the gut. He doesn't feel confident. He had a period where he brought like 7 different rackets, and there were like 4 different string setups in them for testing and training and stuff. And yeah, it's tricky if you don't like the feel. But not in your head, like if you look at most players being open to try for like the gut, especially 4G is one of the stiffest strings on the market, maybe the stiffest string, right? It's an intensely stiff string, and you put it in a dense string bed, it's gonna be a stiff, but it's gonna be a board, like I said before. So it makes all the sense in the world to put gut there. But if you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you. But like, for example, de Minaur uses 4G and gut, works for him. He's playing the best tennis of his life, right? That's obviously not to do only with the racket, but it seems like a setup that makes sense. You also from a technical point of view.
It gives you the best of both worlds in a way, right? I guess at that level, with the softness and the hardness of the of the 4G.